So Lenny, I wonder if you would like to come up and start to try and help us pull out some of the themes that we've seen emerging this afternoon, and just to get a sense of whether their themes or interests people would like to take forward to a conference, and other comments anyone would like to make. For about just another half an hour, and then we'll really give you alcohol. But I didn't say that.
So I'd like to encourage the audience to let us know what themes intrigued you the most that you would like to hear more of, perhaps next year at the major conference. What did you hear about this afternoon that you would like to hear more of?
I think also, just before the first question, bear in mind we very intentionally brought together, if you like, this mixed population of political science people interested in fashion, and fashion people possibly just who came for the cake, but who may be interested also in politics. So bear in mind we've intentionally put this conversation today as a way of maybe stimulating just ways of thinking. But you had a comment, please.
Yeah, and I don't exactly, it's a theme that interests me, and I'm not exactly sure
Shall we give you
how to put it very simply. But it has to do with, actually, we were just talking about one of the words being fear, because I do believe that a great deal of this whole ban the burqa. I would consider myself a feminist. And I've also found myself in the same situation, because I don't believe that we should start to try to legislate it. We're talking about doing the same thing in Canada, right? It's problematic. But what I sort of see going on in society right now is this whole sort of, everything is becoming, or things are becoming quite polarized. There's a strong right movement. And one of the ways in which it's being displayed, of course, is through this type of thing. So how does clothing reflect society? Like I say, there's a whole bunch of, I can't synthesize it completely, but I think there's a theme in there that's very interesting. And in my mind, it goes back to, George Bush, either with us or against us. So.
how to deal with dichotomies or binaries,
right.
Polarities.
I just thought, one possible theme which I think is interesting coming to politics is, of course, the so-called democratization of fashion, if that is actually democratization, or sort of what is actually happening when we think there's democratization. And I just would be interested in the politics of that, and if there are some sort of micro-politics also engaged in that sort of thing. Also thinking of, I think it's interesting how a lot of the H&M and Zara and so on are said to be fueling the democratization of fashion, even though we do not see them out in the marginal or sort of in the projects or outside of the sort of Oxford Street or sort of the main shopping strips. So it feels like it's an invitation for upper middle class to spend more money or get a bigger walk-in wardrobe where they're going to stuff all this stuff, rather than actually sort of, it's a sort of a democratization, actually accessibility for more people. I guess that sort of issues would, I think.
Democracy and fashion.
Yeah, I think that's something quite interesting.
Okay.
I think a theme that keeps popping into my head from the experience I've had as a fashion designer is power. And I think there is really a big shift I'm feeling in society, well, just in like America in general. When it comes to women empowerment, it goes back to the anorexia issue. I actually had a few friends who have had anorexia, and I've worked with them with finding clothes that fit their body type and working with their body type, and getting past the idea of perfection. And it's easy to use fashion as a scapegoat, especially from people who look at haute couture and they say, oh, look at the real thin models. Well, I know for a fact those models are 15, 16, and 17 years old. They haven't developed a body yet. And it's from that education in my field that I've been able to become aware of that and not feel so badly about myself. I think that's the key to this. I think like tweens and teens specifically need to be educated about what's really going on behind the scenes. It's not 20-somethings that are modeling. It's the teens who just are naturally very skinny and very tall. They have, their career has a length of 5 years, and that's it. And I think that once they get to learn that knowledge of what's really going on, who's really controlling the companies, which are men, And a lot of the tour, I mean, people who go 1% who are buying the tour, and that's something we can propose to the top companies like LVMH to have these professional tailors work with people in the stores. We'll say, Bloomingdale's already says that, Bergdorf's does that, we don't need to implement that. What really needs to be looked at is ultimately media and marketing, H&M, fast fashion. Those are the main demographic that they're aiming for, teens, tweens, because their prices are low, and then 20-somethings, 30-somethings, and because you have the affordability to go into the store and just buy something really quickly. Teens and tweens aren't going to be thinking that they're going to need their clothes tailored, and even if we try to implement that with fast fashion brands such as H&M or The Gap, I mean, they make their money by having all their clothing made in China for pennies. They're not going to pay the extra cost to have a tailor come to their store and actually try to help the customers. Most of the time, they don't even want the help because I've worked in retail and people don't like to, be disturbed while they're shopping. So I don't think that would actually be a viable solution. But I really think that education in schools about media and the fashion industry, because it is booming so vastly, especially in the emerging markets of China and India, these girls, especially I have many Chinese friends who are trying to be like Western girls so badly. My roommate, for instance, she's on a ridiculously strict diet and she's trying to fit the mold of the American girl. And it's absurd, but it's because she's come from a place where she's looked at these brands, and now she's here and she's trying to do it. So I think education, and self-esteem education is so integral in the marketing and I think the future of women and how we're going to spend our money.
So power structures behind the fashion industry.
Absolutely.
And education. Just as a side note, what you're talking about in terms of Bergdorf's, and it's about this economy, but I'm talking about other economies as well. It's not just this economy. Yes.
Hi. Unfortunately, I was only here at the very beginning and for the very end, but even in just those small bits, I got so much information. It's been really incredible to hear some of your papers. And I was thinking that in terms of a theme, a strong theme is, and it's very, very general, I just love how what I witnessed before me among you all is this intersection between visual culture and visuality and the production of racialized bodies through clothing. So, like when I was first here, I think Andreas' images from like Guantanamo Bay prisoners to like Robert Zimmerman, the man, in his orange jumpsuit, the mugshot of him, the man who killed Trayvon Martin's hood, to even, like this week, also the beating of that Iraqi-American woman, it's just part of this narrative and this part of, the production of these images that we're just constantly bombarded with, which is, producing this very brutal, it's like brutalized black, brown bodies of color, and racialized. It's like these images are so racialized. And so just that's a huge theme that I think, I don't think is actually happening, like this conversation is really not happening in enough spaces, and it's all through clothing and fashion.
So the regime of race and gender in visual cultures?
I would also be interested in something that threads that through as a continued conversation, and particularly in relation to living when we spoke about creative thinking, how to change creative thinking in the fashion industry. I'm thinking about that differently from the perspective of design education, fashion education specifically. We were just in a conversation just very recently around size 6 runway dress forms and size 8 production dress forms, and there is no space within that for different body types. And if we have a student who's interested in doing something like plus size or doing something that does cater to a different body, there isn't the space for that conversation to really kind of take place. So I'd be interested to see how something like that kind of develop, and a discourse that just kind of shifts us away from thinking of the racialized body as the ethnic trend, and the way that design design trends are often perpetuated from season to season, and there are new ways that they are being kind of articulated, but it's still, we are still talking about this kind of really crazily defined ethnic trends. So I'd be interested in seeing how something like that might open up, as well as design systems thinking. What could exist and what may exist in our curriculum that would embrace ways of thinking through, whether it's kind of market level or just really different systems and ways of thinking through fashion.
So alternatives in design?
Something that, I guess I'm going to be the most obvious poster person for bringing this up, but something more focused on gender and fashion, just because we take trousers for granted as being menswear. We take so much for granted, and gender is cross-racial, and certain, I don't even like the term racial. Well, this kind of sounds ugly, like even coming out of the mouth, but certain regions or geographical places, like you're talking about having a place having a soul, and I was talking earlier about an ontology that didn't separate even places from peoples and materials and so on and so forth, and trying to understand how these things become distinguished, that we can say there's a masculine, we can say there's a feminine, and we do have menswears in women's wear right now, and just kind of try to understand what that means on a much deeper level. So that's gender and fashion, I guess. And then I just had one comment for your project, because the clinicalization of anorexia as a disorder, I think, is problematic on its own, and I think that you have to take like global economies of food into context there, because a thin body is in New York, for example, when I walk around, I see very anorexic women who make me sick to my stomach, because they don't look like models. I don't even think models can work if they're as anorexic as these women. Their heads are like bobbling on this body that's, I don't even know how the organs are functioning. Where models, I know there's anorexic models that are close to that, but I think because they're so tall, their proportion, even not everybody can be that tall either, that most models are. A lot of people have short complexes because you can't be that tall unless you're, from Northern Europe or parts of Africa. So I think that you would really have to take a more critical stance on what anorexia is and how it's disseminated. Also, because only, as this woman was saying, only the 1% can afford to not eat as well, because you have the luxury of saying, no, I'm not going to have this meal. But other places where they're starving or just don't have access to education about how to eat properly, like in America, I've also noticed the flip side, where my girlfriend, who was here earlier, is a normal-sized woman, very normal-sized. She goes to the Gap, and she's a size 0 or a size 2, but that's not right. She's not that small. I see women smaller than her. So you have vanity sizing as a problem as well.
How should we characterize what you just said, the phenomenology of identity in dress?
Yeah.
One thing that kind of came up in a lot of the different discussions that I'd love to see maybe given a couple of case studies or explored more is how do people dress when there's violence, and kind of how do you dress to avoid violence, or how do you dress to provoke it. I think would be like a picture of it.
Dress under violence.
Yeah.
Dress under duress.
Michelle, I think you're
sort of going back, it touches on a few things that other people have said, but thinking about agency on various levels, whether it's sort of user agency or sort of individual levels of empowerment. Because if we're thinking about sort of the politics of power structures are sort of one thing that people find other ways. And it also touches on the conversation we're having about the burqa and the hoodie. Part of what strikes me as part of what makes that so potentially makes us so uneasy about it is that in a world where surveillance is increasingly the norm and so intrusive that it gives us a kind of a way of having personal space, of having a kind of privacy. So, thinking about those sorts of issues.
Agency and empowerment strategies.
You also have that structure and agency involved in fashion.
Absolutely. And it also goes back to thinking about, anorexia too, where, I think a lot of women, I've worked in retail as well, used to buying off the rack, don't know their sizes. So there's this weird disconnect with the body that goes back to not having agency, not knowing how to sew, or not knowing how to sew.
I'm not sure if this is a theme really, but just to speak to your talk, so it's Michelle's point is that standardization of sizes is also very early. It's like a 20th century phenomenon. It came from uniforms, I'm sure Professor Jess could talk to more knowledgeably, but it came from uniforms and military dress. So you do have, and that's been in recent fashion historical study really tied with Fordism. So it's cheaper, it's whatever. So I think it's interesting how in at least complete this moment we do still have these standardized people walking down the runway. It's interesting because if you go to runway shows when you have different body types and really I'm like, oh, this does not look like a fashion show. That's my response and I'm like, it's not necessarily.
So historical analyses of production.
Yeah.
Systems, production systems.
I think several of you mentioned this during the day, but I'd like to emphasize it that sort of, fashion and bodies actually function as spaces. I mean, Marianne mentioned it, and Andreas mentioned it as well earlier. And I think, so your colleague, Marianne Milwar, she did a lovely book called Space Invaders, Women in Parliament in the UK. And her point was, which is also based on the work of Doreen Massey, who's a geographer, that actually bodies become visible in particular ways in particular spaces. So burqa is not a problem in India, even though there are tensions between Hindus and Muslims. But it's not so much of a, the cultural nuances are very much to do with spaces within which bodies become visible or are invisibilized. So I think that a sort of understanding of space and fashion would be interesting because you both kind of touched on it.
The spatial context to bodies and dress.
One thought that I had, which I have a sense that it's been sort of lying behind some of the other papers, presentations. It may sound a little crude because I haven't really thought this out, but the idea that so much about fashion and what one wears, what one allows to be worn in public, or what one chooses to wear in public, there's another side to it, and that is the function. I'm sorry, sociologists, function. I mean, there are certain, in part it has to do with spaces and partly also with institutional settings in which certain kinds of clothing is considered appropriate and in others it's considered inappropriate. And one of the phenomena that has occurred in many places came out in the United States. I'm not speaking of the whole United States, but one place, I hate to say Florida, because Florida sounds like the wrong place to mention, but it happened to be in Florida, where a woman tried to obtain a driver's license, and she had to get a driver's license and have a photograph made, and she insisted on wearing a niqab. And this was denied to start and went through a whole legal process, and eventually the courts that received the case said that there is that she has no right to be photographed with her face completely covered. And I remember thinking at the time, there's a point to that. A driver who has a license should be able to be recognized by anyone in case, I mean, for all the reasons that one has driver's licenses. This is just one example of an argument. I think it's a fair argument, at least I'm convinced, that people should, if they're going to have a photograph made on a passport or any kind of official ID, their face has to be shown. For the rest of their lives, I don't think they should be forced not to expose their faces if they want to. At least this is my reaction to that particular incident. And I wonder if there's a way of dealing with this as a theme, because it was a theme that sometimes is used as an excuse by politicians to say, well, this is not modern and it's not functional if people try to have an official identity paper without exposing themselves so that they can be identified. It happens to be one of the things that French politicians who agreed with Sarkozy and who said women have to keep their faces open in public places. I don't think they have to, but that was what was said. And I don't even think that's the real reason. I think there is much more symbolic politics of worrying about getting enough votes to become president again, in spite of having very low opinion polls about Sarkozy's ability. But how could that be part of?
Well, I think that falls under the general heading of power structures behind fashion. The function could be one excuse or one venue for expressing or exercising that kind of power.
I wonder though if this isn't a sub-case which needs a little more narrowing it down, because what you're saying I think sounds like what should be the general thematic.
Well, thank you for your contribution. Yes. I think there's another. Did you have another hand up? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to keep working through the themes that have been raised today, to keep, to continue looking at structures of power, and today, I mean, we've seen how it works on both like material level and also through the social imaginary. And I think that, the material and imaginary converge certainly in the concept or the idea of subjectivity, maybe especially female subjectivity, but it doesn't exclusively have to be, gendered one way or the other. But, subjectivity that works on a psychic level, but subjectivity is embodied and it's lived and somatic. So in that sense,
issues of subjectivity.
Right.
Yeah.
And power. And,
okay.
I sense that night is falling, or the room is falling. Can I think we should call this a day, yeah? And thank you all very much for being here. Also, thank you for filming. You can turn off the camera. That's been great. Thanks so much.